in all races and creeds. Have people that are good, bad, using my expression, up, down, in, and out. And today my view is judge a person as an individual, not as their background or what their religion might be or their beliefs. Took me a lot of years to get there.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural episode of The Doctor and the Goodfellow. This is a story that's stranger than fiction. It chronicles the rise and fall of two childhood friends who took incredibly different paths, but through a twist of fate, wound up back together on the road to hell. Here with me today, I've got Uncle Ange, also known as Angelo Ailes, and Dr. Ronald Gordon. You guys met at 9 years old and forged a friendship that was unbreakable. Angelo, why don't you tell us how this started?
Well, we were playing Little League baseball together, and there was something that the gentleman that I liked, and we started talking. And, we're 9 years old. I mean, what do we know? We don't know shit to say over. And we realized we only lived, I guess you can call it a few blocks away, at most a half mile. I don't even think so. He lived on Cedar Road. I lived on Cockay Drive. Anybody that came from Long Island, that's in East Northport. He was very interesting, great ball player, great athlete in general, and just a nice, for me as a 9-year-old, I mean, geez, what a nice guy. And met his mom and dad, Dave and Selma. Met his sister. He met my mom and dad, Vito and Camilla. The rest is history, buddy.
Doc, tell us your perspective.
Well, we not only met on the baseball field, although we were at different bus stops, I think we were on the same bus to the same school. I'm not sure if my memory holds right, but I'm not sure we were in the same class, but I believe we were initially. And we also went to class together. So we were together a good part of most of the time during this initial phase of our lives. And we had very interesting experiences together, not only playing ball in Little League, but we used to get together with the kids in the neighborhood and we used to play ball in the street all the time. So it was always a fun time. We maintained this relationship for years.
Cool. Did you guys play high school ball together?
We did.
Okay.
We played, if I'm not mistaken, we played at least through JV baseball together. Yes.
Who's the better ball player?
I actually, interesting you should ask, Mr. Narrator. I became much better later on as a softball player, but Ron was outstanding. Pitcher, catcher, center fielder. I learned a craft at first base, which I became good at in later years. But by far, Doc, not only was he a multiple sports person, he was a state champion in gymnastics, and I used to go to his matches and watch him, always applauding. This was my, is my dear friend. Look at him. But no, Ron had the speed of a gazelle. At a time that speed was everything. I ran more like somebody's got me nailed to the ground. I had to learn how to run, but I was able to hit a baseball pretty good distance. Opposite field hitter, home run hitter. But no, that doesn't enough to say it. Outstanding ball player.
Yeah, but my recollection is that I was probably a better singles and doubles hitter and ran it out with whatever speed I had at the time. But from what my memory serves me, I think on JV baseball, actually, you played second base.
Absolutely.
And then there was an issue, I remember, with regard to the coach with the varsity baseball team, because I believe that the coach was favoring somebody who happened to have been the quarterback for the football team, Kevin O'Connor, back when, and he was their first baseman, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't think Angelo had a shot at that point with regard to playing first base under those circumstances, because Kevin O'Connor's father was deep into these coaches. And because of that, even the football coach worked him to be able to get the Hanson Award for a football quarterback. And he was a horrible football quarterback, in my estimation.
Horrible. And Mr. Narrator, I'll give you something that's been sitting with me for years. And very interesting you asked that question, Mr. Narrator. Doc and I were ready to play varsity baseball. And I'll never forget Mr. Barry, who was the coach of our team, right? He asked me, we were walking into the locker room. And he said to me, how you doing? I says, well, according to my JV coach, I'm batting over 400. He says, no, I didn't ask you about your weight. He said, I asked you about your batting average. Well, Mr. Narrator, I must have had it in me then too, because I wanted to take a baseball bat to his head, and I refused to play for him. Okay, and Doc actually got upset with me, and rightfully so, because you don't quit at anything that you do. Obviously, I didn't quit being an asshole, for 50 years in organized crime, but I can never forget that as long as I live. So, to preempt our conversation, you know what, buddy? That might have been one of my genes right there and then, right from the crime family.
Yeah, but what's actually interesting about that? I had an issue with the football coach, and I had a similar issue when I was supposed to start playing varsity football in my junior year. And I'll never forget, it was a fall day and my asthma was kicking in, and I was running and I hit the line, dropped, and the ball flew out of my hands. All right. And the coach was Stan Classic at the time. He was the head coach, and he wanted me to actually go to the wall of the school and run headfirst into the wall of school with the ball. And at that point, I told him, I'm done. I quit and over. And I walked off the field. It was an interesting concept of it was towards the end of practice anyway. We get into the locker room, all right, and again, this guy, Kevin O'Connor, starts on me, all right? He starts to, hey, you quitter, you this, you that, all right? And I said, either shut your mouth or I'm going to beat the out of you. And he just kept going, and I jumped on him, and I was beating the out of him, and it took 3 coaches and 3 other big linemen to pull me off of him, all right? And you want to know something? I met him while we were playing while my son was playing Little League up in Westchester, all right? And he started a league called the Westchester Putnam Baseball Association, apparently. And he was standing there, and the son of a didn't even recognize me. And when I told him my name, he still didn't know me. He's just a piece of garbage, and he always was.
Hey, let me be able to say something to you, Mr. Narrator. This is going to lead us into future episodes. Why, as Italian guys, did we have a problem with Irish people? Interesting. Because when my grandfathers and my uncle Paul Shaka and everybody come off the banana boat, the Irishmen were the cop. And we were Dagos. We were guineas, pigs. And of course, as we've seen in history and over time, they just love beating on us. Okay? Now, maybe that followed us through years. For some reason, I never got along with Irish people. Blacks, Jews, other people from other nations, other colors, other creeds. I love them. But why do I have a problem with McNally's and the O'Connors? And who knows? And it went through in time. And as Italian guys, yeah, we have our issues. Even though you probably know, Mr. Narrator, the backgrounds of the Westies, and we tried to work with them, but Irish people are different, man. They're different. And you're not supposed to judge. I'll cut right to the video. You like that one? Everybody in all races and creeds have people that are good, bad, using my expression, up, down, in, and out. And today my view is judge a person as an individual, not as their background or what their religion might be or their beliefs. Took me a lot of years to get there. So maybe that summarizes it all.
Doc, sounds like you beat the memory out of Mr. O'Connor, and that's why he couldn't remember who you were all those years later. But had this incredible childhood together through sports and friendship, and then you graduate high school. Angelo, what was the path you were on after high school?
It encompasses a lot. Let's get it down, and put it into a small form. Doc went to school, went to college, universities, became what he is. Ange went to Suffolk Community, 1 year, believe it or not, for criminology. I had this pipe dream of being a police officer and an FBI agent. Matter of fact, Doc might not remember this, but he had his car and I had my car. But Doc knew Manhattan. And when I took the test for the NYPD, Doc actually drove me to New York City to take the test. Very interesting background. That wasn't me, buddy. All right. And my dad saw it, got married. Doc was my best man at my wedding in 1970. And my father said no. there's something about you. Like guy put up the money. I bought a 7-Eleven franchise, which is a story for another day, in another episode. Even Doc helped us there and worked there. And, Doc was doing all her studies. I was learning my craft, the South Bend Corporation. So, and then I was the best man at his wedding with Elaine. I'm like him or different than him. I love his mother-in-law and father-in-law who turned out, they were Holocaust victims. They had numbers on their arms and everything else. I being like a half-ass history buff, got a kick out of them. But anyway, yeah, Doc was in school studying to be what he is today. Ann's had the 7-Eleven store, and Ron helped me there and worked there, and we played softball together. And then our lives, started to go in different directions.
I think you missed a couple of things actually in the beginning, because right out of high school, even though you were, from what I can recall, you were going to Suffolk Community College, is you were also working in the fast food industry. You worked as managers in a number of fast food places in Comac, if I'm not mistaken. And then you moved to another company that had hot dogs and beer, Lums, the famous Lums franchise.
Very good, Doc. And I worked at Carol's Restaurants, right? That was associated with the singer Victor Moan, who happened to be a dear friend of my mother-in-law, my ex-mother-in-law. She knew him from New York, right? And yeah, then I went to Lums. Hot dog, steamed in beer, very good.
I think you even managed Wetson's at the time.
Matter of fact, I have that very famous joke, right?
Yep.
Did you read at that French restaurant, Wetson? Yes. And I remember something they taught us, Doc. You ready for this? And I just said it the other day at McDonald's. Fast and friendly service with a smile. Good and tasty food, hot and cold. And most important, a very good, clean, sanitized in and lot. And I'll never forget that, all these years, right?
Yep. Well, what happened with me is unfortunately, my parents couldn't afford a college that I had a half scholarship to, which was Syracuse. So I went to the State University of New York at Stony Brook, and I started there after high school. I finished after high school, and was during the Vietnam era. And I was, I'll never forget, Angelo and I actually ended up on the same bus just before I finished my senior year in college. We went on the same bus to get our physicals for the military. That happened because of the issue with draft. I think the draft at that point, they brought in the number system, the lottery number system. And we had our physicals, and I guess we both passed to a large degree, although I got a letter back because I have a history of asthma that I was being listed as 1Y. But in all essence, it didn't make any difference, because at the draft board after the lotto, my number was 155 and the draft board only made it to 153. So I was basically clear at that point. However, the issue that affected me the most was the fact that a lot of people were trying to avoid the draft. And in order to do so, they were applying to medical school. I was applying as well. And it made it very difficult, and I didn't get in. And it became an issue. At that point, I was already working, because I had taken some courses. I was working as a respiratory therapist at Smithtown General, and then two other hospitals after that. But what ended up happening was I started a master's program at Stony Brook, where I was taking courses both at Stony Brook and I was taking it at Hofstra to be able to finish in 1 year so I could reapply to medical school. And then during all this time, of course, we were still playing softball together. All right. So we were still good friends no matter what. And then finally, what ended up happening was I had moved in with 2 other would-be medical students, because it was the first medical school class at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. I finished my MS there, and then they said, why don't you go see the people in pathology? Maybe you can, start a research project and work your way into the medical school that way. So that's what I was doing. And I was almost working 24 hours a day because I was not only working, and I was working at Southside Hospital at that time. I was doing the night shift, the 12 to 8 in the morning. And then I would go back home, get a couple hours sleep. And then I would go in to do some research in the pathology department. And then from there, I would take classes in the late afternoon and evening to finish up the masters. Once I was done with that, my preceptor, or the guy I was doing research with, Bernie Lane, said, "Well, we now have a PhD program. Let's get you into the PhD program." And so I applied in, and that I was able to get into. And once I was in there, I was in with the first year medical students. So I was doing everything that they did, including their clinic. And then, unfortunately, at the end of the program, when I finished, because it was a 3-year medical school program, because they went during the summer, I asked them, I said, let me apply into the medical school so I can get an MD and an MD PhD out of this, and I'll continue to finish my research. And they said no, because those days, MD PhDs were frowned upon to a large degree, because they didn't want people from PhDs to be backdooring it into medicine. So it was a real problem for me. I have an MD degree, but I can't use it. I've never taken the exams, and it's unfortunate, but I have the background, and it doesn't make any difference. I don't care.
I think you want me to answer something. And Doc, believe me, we would need 3 hours, because his life, his stories are just, intriguing. And there's so much I could add to that. We don't have the time. But let me add this to you. When Doc was doing that, Mr. Narrator, I went into the iron and steel business. I learned it real fast. My mother ironed and I stole. Okay. So I became very good at what I did. Now, Mr. Narrator, I'm going to ask you, would you like to have a chuckle for the audience about the draft in the Vietnam War in regards to why I became a 1Y like Doc did? Or we don't have the time to do that?
We've got plenty of time.
Well, like Doc said, you talk about similarities. Okay, listen, I'm just going to hit you with a few. Doc's son's birthday is May 18th. My son, Anthony, let him rest in peace. I love him dearly. His birthday was May 18th. Okay. Doc's wife's birthday's April 2nd. My birthday's April 2nd. Okay. It's like we walk through life with so many similarities. He was a 1Y. I was a 1Y. But here's why I was a 1Y, everybody. You're going to laugh at this one. They took me to Fort Hamilton on a bus with a whole bunch of guys from our high school, right? And I was all excited about, I could become an officer, and I want to be maybe an Army Ranger, and I want to be all these things. We did all the testing. I passed everything. All of a sudden, we go at the end, and there was a Dr. Schultz. And Dr. Schultz said, "What? Who's this Angelo?" I am, sir. I can't read this chart. Go back to room 4, right? And I want you to get it redone. I said, "Excuse me, Doc, everybody's going to eat in the chow hall. I want to go with my friend." "What did he tell you? The first rule is you listen to an officer." "Yes, sir." I go back to room 4. Already I got a long face. Everybody's going to eat. And I sit down at a desk, and I get a Dr. Lombardo, Italian doc. And he says to me, "Angelo, are you Italian?" I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He said, "What do you think about this Vietnam War?" I said, "Well, sir, I never gave it much thought." He says, "I was there, and it almost ruined my medical career." "Okay, Doc, thank you. You don't want to go." He says, "I see in the chart here, you were a ball player?" I said, "Well, yeah, I love baseball, and, I wasn't too bad. I was a decent player." "Oh, okay." He finishes my chart, and he sends me back to Dr. Schultz. Dr. Schultz reads it, and he says, What did I tell you? Your blood pressure, 180 over 95. Come back. You cannot go into the service. You're going to come back in a year." I was like, "Oh, no. How do I tell my friends that are in the chow hall, right, that all of a sudden I'm a 1-1? Got my mouth shut. Run back. They laughed. They teased me, right? And they said to me, "What happened?" I said, "They had to read my chart again." I went home. My dad, being a World War II vet, Says to me, how'd you make out? I told him. My mom, being a typical Italian mom, your blood pressure. My God. Next day, he takes me to Dr. Raymond in East Northport. He tested my blood pressure, 115 over 70. He says, what are they talking about? Lombardo wanted to keep me out of the military. Like Doc, I went into the number system. My number was 274. I even play that number to this day, and they only get up to, like Doc said. I guess him and I have a little different. I thought they only get up to number 40, but I'm going to give Doc his memory that I went into the 150s. So I never made it to Vietnam. I never got into the service. And then my career started, like I told you before, at Southland Corporation.
Okay, well, interesting path. You two guys started at 9 years old, and now you, Doc, going to college, becoming a doctor, and Angelo, you're at 7-Eleven. What happened that broke you guys apart?
Well, I think Doc has said this on some of his short clips, and it's something to even this day that I find annoying on my part. Okay. I had a Christmas party and I had quite a few people there. And I invited, of course, Doc and his wife over. And I had, I'm going to leave them nameless right now because the gentleman is an active street boss of one of the families in New York. And he was there with his family. And I didn't realize that Doc was having those kind of issues. Doc, kept things close to the vest. He wasn't out there to throw stories out. So I didn't know what his issues were. That I know today that Doc looked around and I introduced him as my best man at my wedding. Kumbada. Doc picked up real fast. These guys are wise guys. Two brothers that were there and the father that was there. And like I said again, I'm going to leave that nameless for now, but we will talk about that in upcoming episodes. And ladies and gentlemen, when you're listening to this clip, it's going to be very real and very interesting. And I'm going to leave it out there as a cliffhanger for you, right? Because you're not going to believe what inspired and happened with my background. Right? But Doc was right.
And then and now you're going to understand exactly, the audience will understand exactly why I had this issue in another episode.
And obviously, your dad was a hardworking man. Your mom was typical Italian mom, as you mentioned. But yet, you had an interesting background from some other family members. Tell me about some of the other family members that eventually influenced your life greatly.
Doc might remember this story because it all started with him being a well-read individual. He came into my 7-Eleven store and he went to the magazine rack, and there it was, Mafia at War magazine. I'm still wet behind the ears. I wasn't doing the bookmaking then or anything else. And Doc brought it over to me and he says to me, look, isn't this your father's uncle? Right? I said, oh my God, it's the great Uncle Paul Shaka, right? He came over with my grandpa and his Uncle Willie, his brother, and my Uncle Tom, right? And they were in the Garment Center, which then was in Brooklyn, not in New York. And I remember the stories of my childhood. And he showed it to me. Let me segue you to 1978. My dad passes away. And we're at the funeral. And there's Uncle Paul, Uncle Willie, come to pay the respects because Willie Shaka introduced my dad to my mom at his clothing factory in 1946. She was a seamstress. My dad got wounded, spent 6 months in rehab. He was a staff sergeant, and he spent 6 months in a hospital. And they introduced my mother, Camilla, to my father, Vito. So Uncle Willie and Uncle Paul and Uncle Tom were very close with my dad. And those are stories not for today, because I'll tell you stories about my dad and things he told me about the early, what do you want to say, Mafia, gangsterisms, going back to Charlie Luciani. And Dad told me a lot of stories that Uncle Paul and Uncle Willie were involved in. Uncle Willie, not Uncle Paul, comes up to me and says, Uncle, didn't you have a problem with something at your 7-Eleven store? I said, yes, Uncle Willie. I said, I was busted for bookmaking. I didn't even know what it was. Do you know who you belong? Yeah, Uncle Willie, me being a jokester. I belong to my mom and dad, right? I was what behind the ears, Mr. Narrator. I didn't know nothing. And that's when he says to me, you don't have my personal number? I says, no, my mother does. He says, here, don't worry about nothing. You turn around and you call me. We'll do a business. I heard you're very good. You had delicatessens and 7-Elevens. I put up the money. You run the business. We split 50-50. And then I take you into another world. I don't know what that means. Well, let me bring you to the day of the funeral. Doc might remember this. My father had a bakery called Coletti's Bakery. And my godfather, Joseph Coletti, he was there. And I didn't know anything. I'm still wet behind the ears. Didn't know how involved the Coletti family was with Sam the Palma Delvagante. I know nothing. And that's a story again for another day. Going into Elizabeth, New Jersey and going to the Nevada Club. And I've done my research on it today. And I found out, right? And he says to me, hey, Angelo, weren't you one of the guys that got busted in that little bust for bookmaking? And I'm like, Joe, what do I know? Hey, I was one of them taking bets. I didn't know anything. I called for my dad. I called for my brothers. I called for my friends. And they tell me I'm a bookmaker. I didn't know what I mean. So he put his arm around me and said, hey, when you come to New Jersey with your mom, come talk to me. Henceforth, I did my research over the years. And I found out who he was and who his father, John Coletti, was. And that all will come about when we talk about my first bust in 1980 and how their name came up. Because my first bust was really in New Jersey with my partner, Joe Travata. So I'll explain all that later on. That was the introduction, what I now know today with the world of organized crime.
Angelo, thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, this story is about to take a wild turn. As we know, Angelo Ailes embarked on a life of crime, and Dr. Gordon became a doctor, but through a weird twist of events and fate, intersected in the same world that Angelo Ailes lived in for the next 40 years of his life. Thanks for tuning in to The Doctor and the Good Fellow. We'll see everybody real soon.